She was standing at a grave, her 3 sons behind her in their Christmas clothes. Their shirts were freshly pressed, and the name carved into that grave, every single letter of it, belonged to the man she had been sleeping beside for 15 years. The man who kissed her forehead every morning. The man who held her hand through 3 labors. He had been dead for 22 years, long before she met him, long before she married him, long before she bore him 3 sons. And now she was standing at his grave, and her legs gave way. And the sound that left her body was not a scream. It was something older, something that had no name in any language. Because Adaora had just understood the truth. She had spent 15 years as the wife of a dead man. But before we get into this story, if you enjoy real African horror like this, take a second to subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming next. To understand what happened to Adaora, you have to go back. Back before the marriage, back before the children, back before any of it. You have to go to a small compound in Umunze in Anambra State, where a young man named Emeka Johnson was born as the only child of 2 people who loved him so fiercely it almost hurt to watch. You know how some parents love their children? With warmth and comfort and the ordinary texture of family life? That was not how Emeka's parents loved him. They loved him the way people love something they are terrified of losing. Because they knew, in the way that parents of only children always know, that everything they had was held inside one person, one heartbeat, one life. And if that life went out, nothing would be left. Emeka was 23 years old. He was the kind of young man that people remembered even after he left a room. Not because he was loud, not because he demanded attention, but because being near him felt easy, safe, like the air around him was just a little softer than everywhere else. He had his whole life ahead of him. He had plans. He had a future that existed, vivid and solid in the minds of everyone who knew him. And then one evening, he came home complaining of a headache. That was all it was, a headache. His mother gave him water. His father told him to rest. By nightfall, the headache had become a fever. By midnight, he was delirious, talking to people who were not in the room, reaching for things that were not there. And by morning, by the time the sun came up over Amunze, Emeka Johnson was dead. No warning. No illness that had crept up over weeks, no explanation that any doctor or herbalist or pastor could give. Just a young man who went to sleep with a headache and did not wake up. They buried him that same day. There was no long waiting period, no elaborate preparation. They buried him behind the family compound, under a wooden cross with his full name carved into it, every letter of it. And life, the way life always does, moved forward. Time passed. The grief stayed, but the world kept turning. And in Umunze, the grave of Emeka Johnson sat quietly behind his father's house, growing old. But here is where the story refuses to be simple. Because somewhere else, miles and miles away, in Isieke, in Imo State, something was beginning. He arrived the way rumors arrive, quietly at first, just a man, tall, strong, quiet in a way that sat just slightly outside the boundary of normal. He said his name was Emeka. He had no family name he offered freely, no village he claimed, no people anyone could trace. He came looking for work, and in a place where strong hands were always needed, that was enough at first to stop people from asking too many questions. He cleared land. That was what people noticed first. He would take on a job that should take a team of men 3 or 4 days, and he would finish it alone in a single day, without resting, without drinking water in the way that men who are working hard need to drink, without sweating the way that bodies that are exerting themselves need to sweat. The older men in Isieke would watch him and then look at each other and say nothing, because there are some things that are easier to leave unspoken. The work was exceptional. The harvest from the land he cleared was always unusually good, too abundant, too perfect, in the way that made farmers quietly grateful and quietly unsettled at the same time. And so nobody pushed. Nobody demanded to know who his father was, what his mother's name was, which direction he came from. They needed the work done. He did the work, and life in Isieke continued. But then he saw Adaora, and everything shifted. Adaora was not the kind of woman who was waiting to be chosen. That is the most important thing to understand about her before you understand anything else about this story. She had her own provision store. She had her own savings, carefully kept, added to slowly and deliberately over years of early mornings and late nights. She had her own life, structured, self-sufficient, built by her own hands. Adaora was not desperate for any man. Men had come before. Good men with families people could trace. She rejected all of them, not out of pride, just no connection. Until Emeka. He did not pursue her the way the others had. He did not arrive with grand gestures or polished speeches. He didn't chase her. He didn't pressure her. He didn't impress her with big talk. He just stayed. They started talking. Small things at first, then deeper things, then the kind of conversations that make you forget time. Sometimes they would sit in silence, and somehow it wasn't awkward. That was new for her. For the first time in years, she found herself leaning towards someone. 3 months after they met, he asked to marry her. Not a long speech, not a ceremony of words, just, "I want you as my wife." And she felt the yes rising in her before she had fully decided to say it. But there was a problem, a serious one. In Igbo culture, you do not marry a man whose people you do not know. You do not join your family to a question mark. You do not say yes to a man who cannot tell you where he came from, who his father's father was, what compound would receive the bride price. When her family asked, "Who are your people?" he had no answer. And that silence nearly ended everything. It was 2 respected elders in the community who finally intervened. They agreed to stand in place of his absent family to provide the structure that tradition required. And so the door that had been about to close stayed open, and Adaora said yes. But even on the wedding day, even in the middle of the celebration, in the noise and color and joy of it, something felt wrong. It was a feeling she could not name or locate, like a note played just slightly off-key in a beautiful song. She pushed it down. She told herself it was nerves. She told herself every bride feels this. And when the photographer raised his camera to capture the moment, Emeka put his hand up. "Stop. No pictures." Adaora pushed back. "Just one," she said. "Just one photograph." He agreed, reluctantly, to one. No crowd in the frame, no witnesses captured alongside them, just the 2 of them standing together. One photograph. And she tucked the feeling away and married him. The rules came slowly. That is how these things always work. Not all at once, not in a way that would have turned and run on the first day. Slowly, one rule then another, until the strangeness had become the texture of ordinary life, and she no longer noticed how strange it was. The first rule was the mirrors. He told her this calmly, as if it were a simple preference, a small thing. No mirrors in the house. Not on the walls, not on the dressing table, not anywhere. And if she brought one in, he would break it. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply told her in the same quiet, even voice he used for everything. And she accepted it the way you accept the preferences of someone you love. We all have our things. She adjusted. She found other ways to check her face before she went out. She bought a small compact she kept in her bag. She managed, but she watched him on the days that she could for some sign of what the mirrors meant to him, some explanation in his face. She never found one. She noticed other things. Dogs. Every dog they passed, every dog in the compound of neighbors, every stray at the edge of the market, they barked at Emeka. Not the way dogs bark at strangers. This was different. This was the way dogs bark at something they cannot understand, something that registers to their senses as wrong in a way they have no vocabulary for. The barking would start and the dogs would not stop, not even when he was still and quiet and gave him no reason to fear him. She told herself it was just his energy. Some people have that effect on animals. She told herself a lot of things. Then there were the nights. She would wake in the small hours of morning, in that fragile half-darkness before morning, and she would reach for him beside her, and her hand would find the mattress cold. Not the cooling warmth of someone who had slipped out of bed minutes ago. Cold, like the mattress had never been warm, like nobody had ever lain there. But he would be there, right beside her, present still, eyes closed, and the coldness would radiate from him like something that lived inside him rather than something that had come from outside. She pulled her hand back. She lay still. She listened to him breathe. And in the morning, when he made her tea and asked how she slept, she said, fine, because she loved him, genuinely, completely. He loved her back in all the ways that are hardest to walk away from. The small ways, the daily ways, the ways that accumulate over years into something that feels like the foundation of the world. He was present. He was attentive. He was kind to their children in the specific, unhurried way that good fathers are kind. 3 sons, one after another, and each one born looking so precisely like him that strangers would stop and stare. Adaora raised them, built a life inside that house with its cold nights and no mirrors and barking dogs, and she stayed because the love was real. But one question never fully went away. Where is your village? She asked it across the years in different ways, at different moments, with different degrees of patience in her voice. He always moved around it, changed the subject, gave her the shape of an answer without its content, until the year she decided she had waited long enough. She gave him an ultimatum. This is Christmas, she told him. This year we are going to your village. Your children will know where they come from. Your people will see their faces. And if you will not take us there, I will leave. She had never said that before. And something in the way she said it, the steadiness of it, the exhaustion beneath it, told him she meant it. He agreed. On the 23rd of December, they left. It was a long journey. The roads stretched out and then narrowed. The paths became dusty and overgrown in places. Adaora sat in the vehicle with her 3 sons in their Christmas clothes and watched the scenery change and felt something she could not name gathering in the air around her. Then they arrived, and the village was beautiful. That is what she would remember later. Through everything that came after, the village was genuinely beautiful, green and alive and real, exactly what she had imagined all these years, exactly what she had hoped. Emeka stopped walking at a certain point on the path and pointed to a compound ahead. That house, he said, is my father's. Take the children inside. I will meet you there. I have something to attend to. She hesitated. He looked at her with those quiet, steady eyes. Go, he said gently. She went. She walked into the compound with her 3 sons behind her, their shirts still crisp. She greeted the old man sitting inside. I am Adaora, she said, Emeka's wife. And the silence that followed was not the silence of a man who was surprised or caught off guard. It was a deeper silence, the silence of someone who has just heard something that should not be possible. Which Emeka, the old man said, not as a question exactly, more like a man buying himself a moment before he had to continue. People gathered, the way people in compounds gather when something significant is happening, without being called, drawn by some collective instinct. They looked at her 3 sons, and the looks on their faces were not the looks of people seeing children for the first time. They were looking at those boys the way you look at something that unsettles you, something that reaches back into your memory and pulls at something lodged there. They whispered to each other. They look like him. They look exactly like him. Adaora pulled out the wedding photograph, the only photograph that existed of her marriage. She held it out to the old man. He took it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he set it down on his knee very slowly, very carefully, and he looked up at her with eyes that had nothing left to hide behind. My daughter, he said, that is my son. A pause that lasted a lifetime. He died 22 years ago. Adaora ran. That is all her body knew how to do in that moment. The compound fell away behind her. The old man's voice fell away. Her children's voices fell away. She ran back down the path they had walked up together, calling his name. The trees on either side of the path, the red dust rising around her feet, his name leaving her mouth again and again, like something she was trying to hold on to by saying it out loud, as if the name itself could keep him from being gone. She reached the place where she had last seen him, where he had stood and pointed and told her to go ahead. I will meet you there. He was not there. The path was empty, except for his shoes. His shoes were on the ground, placed neatly side by side on the earth, precisely where he had been standing, not thrown aside, not dropped, placed the way you place things when you are making a deliberate choice, as if he had stepped out of them calmly and completely and walked somewhere shoes could not follow. She stood there with the empty shoes at her feet and his name dying in her throat, and the forest was very quiet, and the silence was the kind that answers nothing. That night, Adaora did not sleep. She lay in the dark of someone else's house in that village, and she stared at the ceiling and she did not sleep. By morning, she had made a decision, and it was the most painful decision she had ever made. She left her children behind, not because she did not love them. She loved them with every functioning part of herself, but she knew what she was in that moment. She was not whole. She was not safe. She was a woman who had just discovered that the ground beneath her entire life was not what she had believed to be, and she was not yet capable of being what her children needed. She left them in the care of people who could hold them while she went somewhere she could break completely, and then slowly begin to reassemble. Months passed and she came back. That is the part of this story that people do not always talk about, but should. She came back. She returned to her sons. She looked at their faces, which were his face, and she did not turn away. She raised them. She rebuilt her life around them with the painstaking care of someone who knows what it cost them to still be standing. The house they had shared with Emeka stood empty for years. No one moved into it. No one particularly tried. It sat on that land and waited until her sons grew up, until they came back to it and began to farm the land around it. And the harvest was always too good, always too abundant, always just past the edge of what should be possible from that soil. Every Christmas Eve, the dog would start to bark at the gate, and then mid-bark, between one sound and the next, it would go silent, and it would sit perfectly still, watching the path with its eyes moving, as if it were tracking the movement of something it could sense but not see. Watching something cross the compound the way it used to watch Emeka cross it all those years ago. Adaora understood by now what the signs had always meant. The mirrors, because there was nothing there to cast a reflection. Something without a body, inhabiting the shape of one, moving through the world in borrowed flesh that had its own name on a grave in Anambra State. The dogs, because animals have senses that live below language, below logic, below the part of us that explains things away. The cold, because he was never warm in the way that living things are warm. And yet the love was real. She had turned that over in her mind for years, held it up to the light from every angle, tested it the way you test something you are afraid might break, and it held. The love was real. Whatever he was, whatever the truth of him was, in the moments between them, in the years they built together, in the way he looked at her and their sons, the love was genuine. She did not know how to make sense of that. She had stopped trying to. Some things are not meant to be resolved. They are meant to be carried. On certain nights, not always, not predictably, she would feel it. Lying in her bed in the dark, she would feel the air beside her go cold. Not the cold of an open window or the harmattan pressing through the walls. The specific cold that she had spent 15 years sleeping next to without ever fully understanding what it was. It would come and settle beside her, just long enough to be unmistakable, and she would speak into the darkness. Not out of fear, out of something much older than fear. She would whisper, I named them well. And the cold would stay for just a moment longer, just long enough to feel like something receiving what had been said, just long enough to feel, in whatever way that word could possibly apply here, like an answer. And then it would go, and Adaora would close her eyes, and outside the dog would settle.
So what can we learn from Adaora's story? Sometimes the signs are there from the beginning, but love makes us blind. Not every secret is harmless, and not every love is safe. And most importantly, before you give your life to someone, make sure they truly belong to this world. If this story gave you chills, click the subscribe button. We appreciate your support.